Hello, João and Benjamin. Nice to have you here today. It's such a beautiful day here in the Netherlands.
It is indeed.
So, we are going to talk about DevEx today. João and I both attended a panel last week, and we thought the questions were so excellent from that panel that we should have a show just dedicated to them here today. And I also was talking about this together with Benjamin. He is a tech lead at Novoda. He works with me. And he thought, wow, there's so much to say about this topic. So I invited also Benjamin to join us on the show today. So why don't we start with some introductions? Benjamin, would you like to introduce yourself to us?
Sure. Hi. So, as mentioned, I'm Benjamin. I'm a tech lead at Novoda. Been working at Novoda for close to 10 years now. Been working with Sarah for maybe 6 months, something like that. I have a background mostly focused on mobile engineering, but I've worked at companies, with companies small to large, kind of integrating in various different teams. So, looking forward to having this chat with you on what that might mean for DevEx when it comes to those teams that I've encountered.
Amazing. Thank you, Benjamin. And I guess you already kind of know Joam and myself. Would you like to have a short introduction, Joam?
Yes, of course. Yes, I'm João. I'm a software engineer and Scrum Master at Bow.com. I'm very passionate about empathetic leadership, and I think there's a great link between this and a great developer experience. So I'm happy to be here to explore this topic further.
Nice. Welcome, Joam. And I'm Sarah. I'm the Director of Engineering at Novoda. And I'm also the founder and a coach at Augustin Coaching. I partner together with Joam with that. And Augustin Coaching actually focuses on system coaching. So, system meaning agility, personal development, and leadership coaching because it's all intertwined. So, this topic actually is quite close to my heart because I fully believe that without making a developer experience good, in the end, you cannot produce business value for your end customers. So I'm really excited about today's questions. So I'm just going to work through the questions. The first question is, could you please provide your definition of DevEx? And this could include terms such as engineering productivity and developer enablement, whatever comes to your mind. I'm going to start with Joam on this one.
Okay. So developer experience, right? I'd like to share my view with a small story. My focus as a developer was on the backend part. And imagine that you are a developer and you just joined this new company, I don't know, 3 months ago, and you focus on delivering value, right? So you start your day, you have your daily stand up that usually lasts around 15 minutes, but actually during the past months, it is lasting 45 minutes up to an hour. You have lots of surprises, impediments, production bugs. Things get a little bit out of control. After everything is sorted out, you start developing your new feature. You have some assumptions, you start to break them, and you write your unit tests. Your unit tests take, I don't know, an extra 45 minutes just for you to see the final results. Then while you wait for these feedback loops to end, you start grabbing a coffee here and there. Then again, the tests fail, you come back, you try to see what happened, you wait an extra 45 minutes, you grab another coffee, and then when you see it's already 5, 6 o'clock, you drink, I don't know, 6 coffees in a day. You were forced to do it. And this keeps going, right? One day after another. After perhaps 2 weeks, you think you have a reliable software, then you try to deploy it on production, but then you discover that you can only deploy 1 month later because you have just missed the deadline for the previous release. if you see the way that I'm going here, we have lots of feedback loops in a day as a developer. So you are validating your assumptions with unit tests, or you are even onboarding a new team and it takes 5 months for you to get up to speed. If you deploy something on production, did you get any feedback from the customers? Did it work? How much time does this feedback loop take for you to get? The more these feedback loops take, the less developer experience you will have. You will get stressed. You will have to context switch a lot. You have to take forced breaks because you are just waiting. This is developer experience for me. And you can either have a great experience, starting even from hiring to offboarding, everything in between this, or you can have a crappy experience. So it's quite a broad term and it's a bit everywhere, and it's a very important one.
Wow. Thank you, João, for your story. Benjamin, do you have something to add to this?
Yeah, I mean, I completely relate with what Joan was actually presenting. It's, I think, a story that a lot of developers can relate to. It's something we've probably seen and experienced. I think that emphasis on the different types of feedback loops, the different types of systems that you interact with as a developer, the different parts of your journey that all have various ways that can impede you or force you to context switch, are definitely what makes this term so broad. You mentioned earlier, Sarah, the concept of developer enablement. And I think to me, that's kind of the term I like to use. I think it's almost synonymous with developer experience, but I like bringing enablement into it because it brings this idea of what you're truly trying to achieve. You know, we can hear developer experience, we can hear productivity, but like enablement is a bit of both. You want to make your developers as efficient as possible. That's one aspect of it. But enablement is also striving and being able to be comfortable working. And I think enablement have that duality into it, where what we're really trying to do is make your developers as efficient as possible, but also as comfortable as possible, and make this whole experience something that flows seamlessly. So yeah, fully relate to it, and just wanted to kind of shout out a little bit the term enablement, which is kind of close to my heart in how we describe this.
Yeah. So for myself, I think of developer enablement or experience as when I'm on autopilot and I'm not feeling valued or seen, I'm not part of the idea creation. I'm expected just to write my code and do it faster, increase the velocity. I feel that I go into this kind of zone of I don't feel inspired, I don't feel motivated, and you're definitely not increasing the business value that I'm bringing because I'm shut down. So for me, as an engineering leader, I try to enable the developer experience, to improve the developer experience by seeing developers not just as developers, but as humans with a multitude of talent, passions. They have different ideas about how to make the product better. Maybe they have talents which could help also the customer connect with different ways of doing things or solutions. And when I think back to the early days when I was a software engineer, and I don't know, I even feel like it's strange because agility is this big thing now, and I'm all about agility. I mean, I'm an agile coach. But one of the things that I really did like about the waterfall days of my past is developers, software engineers like myself, we're involved in these big phases that were before, in the middle, and the end. It was called end-to-end development. And at the beginning, you were asked to join the sales engineer or the person that was in contact with the customer to get the requirements. And then you were asked to transform those requirements into designs and as engineers, you were asked to give time estimates. And of course, you also did the code. So once you passed the requirements phase, you went into the development phase and then the testing phase. And the testing phase always involved going back to the customer and checking, like, do you have what you need, etc. So I know that waterfall just doesn't work because software engineering is too complex. You cannot predict what's going to happen or what changes you will need. So anything that you designed, let's say a year ago, is not going to be valid even a few months down the road as you're writing the code. However, what existed when I was a young engineer was I was part of the entire process. I was talking to the customers from day one and understanding their requirements. And I was there until the end of the process. So I was so engaged. I was so married to the ideas that we were developing. I was part of it. And that motivated me. That gave me energy. So when it came time to deploy something and we had this due date and we had to get it done because this was our release date, I was so motivated and so energized by the solutions that we were working on, because I was also part of the requirements phase, part of the design phase, that I had no problem to work through the weekend and have pizzas with my colleagues, because I was valued as a thought provoker. I was the inventor of the solution. I was treated like someone that was intelligent and part of the ideas. And then agility came. I really believe in agility in the form that as you evolve a solution, you learn with each step. So with every experiment, with every A/B test, with every deployment of small unit of code and bringing it to your customers, you learn something, and then you will adapt and change as you move along and make the solution better and more close to what they don't even know that they need until they see it, you know? However, one of the negative side effects I've seen happen with the invention of agile teams is you have this like developers, you have the business, you have this like gateway with product owners in the middle, and everyone is kind of trying to protect each other. You know, everyone is trying to like, you know, like you have these like, you know, we're the business side and we're the developer side, etc. So developer experience to me is interjecting that way that we used to do it when software engineering started into the learnings of agility that we have now. So bringing developers towards the customers, making them part of the solutions, closing those feedback loops, as João said. Why do they need to be there? We can be agile and we can be connected with our customers. And you know what comes automatically from that? If you allow an engineer to think about different ways of solving things, you automatically will engage their talents and their passions, and their motivation is just there. And so as a side effect of increasing developer experience, you are actually increasing customer value. You're becoming more productive, and it's so vital and it's so important. And that's, to me, what the topic is about.
Yeah, that's a good one. And if when we talk about these feedback loops, you talked about customer values. If I give an example of a great feedback loop, if you deploy something to production, was that change useful to the customer, be it an internal or external customer? It is very often that we actually don't have that answer at all. Then the only thing bonding a team would be the tasks themselves. What's the mission? What's the vision? that leads to a bad developer experience itself.
Yeah.
That's a very good point that you made, Sarah.
Yeah, definitely. So shall we move to the next question, or does someone else want to add something to this one?
Maybe just one thing, because like I quite resonated with what you mentioned about kind of bringing people together, and I feel it's kind of it's often is about that, breaking the barrier, kind of trying to have a way of getting people to work all together and not being siloed in their own specific things. I feel like that's, as you mentioned, like a side effect, I guess, a bit of how Agile functions, but also how larger corporations grow. It gets easier in a way to just only deal with your team. And it kind of has this self-reinforcement of like staying in your bubble. And some of the most effective team and the most fulfilled team that I've seen and have been a part of have been when those barriers have been broken, when people have started collaborating on all that chain from ideation to delivery. And sometimes you have to push a bit to make it happen. I guess coming from an agency, we've had sometimes a bit of help from that regard, because being externals, you can disregard certain rules that exist within the business and kind of come in as the disruptors of being like, let's go talk to that person over there that your team doesn't talk to normally, and kind of force that wall to break down. But usually when that happens, when that communication starts flowing, there's huge improvements to be had. People feel more empowered. Ideas start coming up from every level of that chain, and you have, in the end, a better product. So
yeah, almost every developer I ever knew, or software engineer, they didn't go into it because, oh, I like to write code. In a way, they're inventors, they're artists, they're creatives, and they do it with code, and engaging this aspect by connecting them to the actual solution that they're trying to solve engages into that motivation and that feeling of worthiness. And I do feel that it's not Agile in itself which creates it, because actually, if you read the Agile Manifest, it doesn't talk about barriers. It talks about multifunctional teams. When I go in to help a team become more empowered, I try to get that in their head. The product owner is not a gatekeeper. Close down those barriers, go and talk with those customers. There's processes in place to help. Of course, the product owner has the mandate in order to prioritize and choose what is needed. That's important, but it does not mean that the developer should have zero communication with their customers. Those stories, there's a reason stories should not have the how in them. It's in order to remain flexible in what type of solutions can come up. So if you go too detailed into making a story that's perfect and you tell exactly how this should be coded, you would never have had iPods in the past. You would not have the modern day phones, because somebody was open enough to think of, okay, there might be another way of doing this, like opening a menu. You don't have to go down to start and move over, and let's do it differently. And that's where you get the power out of those engineers that you have on your teams. So yeah. Lovely topic. It's just our first question. I'm super excited about this. Next question. So this one is interesting. You hear all of these dev this, dev that. What distinguishes DevEx from DevOps, Benjamin?
a really good question. I mean, to me, like, DevOps is a culture and a practice, right? It's the idea that as your developers, you're not just producing code, you're not just creating the thing, but you're accompanying it from the beginning to the end. We've talked about like this long chain, right? Like from ideation to delivery. And it's kind of this idea, right? DevOps is making sure that whenever you're part of creating, part of building, then you're also part of delivering it and supporting it as it goes into production and as users are using it. So I see DevOps as being more this practice and this culture, and DevEx as being what you put in place to enable it. So you need good DevEx so that your developers are empowered to be able to support things. If they don't have the right tools or the right access or the right support, they might not be able to support something from ideation to production. So it's kind of one empowers the other. You're striving to achieve good DevOps so that people are owning things and delivering value throughout, and then you need good developer experience to support them and enable them to achieve DevOps. That's my understanding of it.
Wow, that's an amazing definition of it. Really well said, Benjamin. João, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, 100%, Ben. Really.
Yeah, it was amazing. Like, I've heard a few definitions and I'm like, spot fucking on.
Yeah. I truly believe that indeed DevOps is everything that Ben said. So focusing on the software development lifecycle, let's say. So I've worked for companies that were in this digital transition. So we had like the development team, we had the infra team. It was the feedback loop that I just mentioned was like huge. It was, the developer experience was not great at all. And I was there during this digital transition, and I worked for companies where we have this DevOps culture. Like, well, different companies call it different names, but that mantra of you build it, you want it, and then you are responsible for everything, right? And developer experience is everywhere. It was there before we had the DevOps culture. It was there during the transition, and we have that now that we have this DevOps mindset. And you can either go the good way, enabling the developers having short feedback loops, and everyone's mental health is way improved, I would say. Or you can go the other way, trying to have DevOps as well. So while the DevOps focuses on the software development lifecycle, DevEx is focused on the developer experience when facing all of this.
Yeah, I fully agree that without a good developer experience, it gets difficult to have DevOps in place. You can try it, but developers will not feel empowered. You won't get the motivation from them. And DevOps is broader. It's not just about the developer. It's about the experience of product owners, the experience of the customers, the experience of everything, because you're breaking down all those walls and those barriers in between, making these multifunctional teams end to end from the moment that you write the code, you build the code, you can deploy it, and taking away those barriers in the middle so that it can be seamless and quick, and that you are able to deliver every day versus like every 3 months of the past, or even sometimes every half year. It was crazy. I also very often when I hear about developer experience, tools are mentioned, like having the right IDEs so that you can or being able to deploy quicker, having a good computer, a good internet connection. That's all part of it. But other things also, like how you set up your meetings in your company. Do you have focus time? Are you considering the needs of the developer, that they need to really deep dive into their code and you're not pulling them out of these deep moments of coding, because you need to have a question answered? That's also part of the developer experience. So it encompasses so many things, from your personal development, being able to connect your personal goals and create impact in the organization, but also, am I able to focus and actually be successful in writing my code because my employer is setting it up for me to be successful? Those are all included. So I feel DevEx is just a subtopic of DevOps, and DevOps is the umbrella, and DevEx is just a piece of it.
Which is a great cue for our next question, right? About
yeah,
tooling.
exactly. So can you provide an overview of the tooling landscape that your DevEx teams are responsible for, João, since you bring it up?
Yeah, I think whenever we talk about DevEx, it's pretty easy to go that way that you mentioned, Sarah, about having a great internet connection or the best IDE. And we are all used with the tech stack that we have. We can deploy things on cloud. We need to have the infra process, the paved highway, let's say, there to link with what Ben said, having developer enablement in practice. What I've seen is that lots of companies are also focusing on having an internal developer platform that kind of makes an abstraction of all of this and try to make, for example, creating an infra to deploy your cloud service easier, or opening a ticket to another team, having this single place to go where you could solve almost everything in an easy way. So developers could stay in this state of the flow. So you don't context switch and you have higher productivity. But something that is very often taken for granted is indeed, how do you facilitate your meetings? How do you make sure that everyone is heard, that everyone has a voice? Even to talk about developer experience itself. So let's reflect. How is our experience here as developers in this team? Can people do that really? And if done, is it done in a good way where everyone can chip in their ideas and, I don't know, see the values and create a team manifest, for example, to highlight this? And that's where I would put a tool like liberating structures. How do you structure the conversations around in your team? That will go a long way, and it is very often taken for granted, but it shouldn't be.
Yeah. And Benjamin, do you have something to add to that?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, one, I fully 100% behind what João was saying around facilitating communication within teams, being meetings, being like how that communication flows, especially as you're maybe growing your organization and you're trying to find different ways of working. Like a good way of improving this DevEx might be, we've talked a few times, cross-functional team, full feature teams. But when that happens and you start growing, you might have loads of them. And now you have a problem of needing this horizontal communication across those for people that are in the same discipline, of being able to share ideas, have a unification of the way you might implement certain tech stack, go in certain ways. And you need to find ways to enable that communication and to improve that communication. So definitely 100% behind that. What I would add, maybe it comes a bit from like my being more of a mobile expert and having worked a lot in mobile. The interesting thing about the mobile landscape is that aspect of the tooling that you said that is very present everywhere. It's not as easy in mobile. It is not as present. The concept of DevOps and of developer experience, I think, is more recent. And there's also a lot more blockers along the way. I mean, because of the ways you might deploy, you're deploying to walled garden, you have heavy processes that prevent you from doing whatever you want and just shipping as regularly as you might want. And all of those are obstacles that you have to overcome, and you have to put a little bit more thought and a little bit more effort into that automation, that tooling, to achieve the same level of flow that you might be able to get a little bit easier on backend or web technologies. So I guess it's a lot of the aspect on communication, fully agree. I was just added on the tooling side. Maybe not all technologies are the same space, and that's something to keep in mind as well. Like, what is your tech stack? What are you working towards? And do you really have the right amount of support to enable that developer flow?
Do you have any tips for companies that are working in mobile and how to improve their tooling experience for developers?
The first step is like, are you even evaluating it and monitoring it? Do you have metrics?
Do you even know it's a problem?
Yeah, what is the state of your developer experience? That's the first step to anything, really, is like, try and understand it. Where are you at on that curve? Is it a good experience? Is it like, how fast is your feedback cycle? Like, how often are you releasing? How long does it take for just a simple pull request to get merged? And once you start having data on those, then you can start drafting a plan. There's a lot that developers are creative people. If you give them a goal, they'll figure it out. Like, it's more about trying to have a good understanding of where you're at and then dedicate some time. allocate some resources to it, and you'll find a way to overcome those. But the first step is be aware of it and start monitoring it, I think would be my best advice.
Yeah, amazing. And I wanted to add to the liberating structure conversation of João. We, in this world, it's different than the world we used to work in. And we work with people from all over the globe. And especially here in the Netherlands, I remember the Dutch, by the way, are a very direct culture. So the engineering manager will come in the room and say, if you have an opinion, just state it. It's okay. It's fine. And they would get this impression that, okay, nobody is speaking up, so everything is okay, without considering the cultures that are in the room. If you study about different cultures and the different culture indexes, there's a lot of differentiators, like, are you a high context culture? Are you a low context culture? Are you one which regards hierarchy as something very important, or are you flat in your organization? So let's say you have a room of people and you have some people in that room that are from, let's say, India or Brazil, or, these countries which have hierarchy, for example, as part of their cultural index. This is something which is built in from those first 7 years of life. So you can't get rid of it just because you've moved abroad. And you're in that room with that engineering manager that says, hey, speak up if you have something to say. And they're not going to say anything because the manager's in the room asking the question. It's an honor thing. It's this respect thing. Of course, I'm not going to say something against this person that's, my leader in the same room, because that would be considered really bad, so I'm just going to be quiet here and nod my head. And that will lead to a lot of misunderstandings. Either the manager will think everything's going fine when it's not, or maybe someone will be promoted because they speak up all the time. They happen to be Dutch and they're very direct. And the manager will think this person is like really a leader. And the one which is not doing that is not a leader because they're not contributing. By introducing the most simple liberating structure, so it's the easiest one, I think, it's called a 1-2 for all, you take away most of this particular problem, because you have that 1 minute of self-reflection time. So you ask a question like, is there anything I can do as a manager to improve this team? And they have 1 minute to think about it. So the introverts, or the people that take longer to think, they can take a moment to think. So the extroverts are not blurting things out. Then you're asked to pair with someone. So you take your ideas and you go into breakout rooms, or in the office, you would just pair off into small groups, and you share your idea with another person. So it's no longer João's idea or Benjamin's idea. It's João and Benjamin's idea. There's a bit of safety in that. So just keep that in mind. So then you're asked to take those two pairs and share in a group of 4. So now it's João and Benjamin's idea shared with the other group's idea, and it becomes a group of 4's idea. So now when it gets back to me, the manager, so it's 1-2 for all, everyone is bringing their ideas to the table. I only know that there's an idea coming from this group of 4, an idea coming from this other group of 4. It's no longer Benjamin that's complaining about the manager and what to improve. So the individuals in the team feel safe to say honestly what they feel, even if they have hierarchy, and because they're not telling directly to their manager what needs to be improved. Instead, it's coming from the small groups up to me. So you end up getting everyone being able to contribute, but also you take away that labeling of who it is coming from. So every liberating structure has something in it in order to allow for the different personality types, the different cultural indexes. If you're neurodiverse or not, you communicate differently. And when you have these multifunctional teams, as Benjamin mentioned, these giant teams of people, it's different than when you had the group of 3 all from the same country sitting together in the same room. You have to do more to ensure that the teams, everyone in that team has a good developer experience. They are all heard, seen, respected, and they all have the ability to contribute if they're not the ones that are going to be yelling the loudest in the room. So I think that's a very valid point, João, and also Benjamin, about the giant teams that are coming from our growing cultures. Is there anything else that someone would like to add? No? So let's move on to the next question. So when creating a high level of abstraction, how do you address the needs of groups, such as data engineers who are more focused on infrastructure? Benjamin.
This is quite an interesting question, like especially it relates to what we were talking about earlier, right? About creating those kind of cross-functional team. How do you integrate like people across all of that? And it's a bit of a cop-out, but like my default answer to a lot of those is usually like improve communication, making sure there's good communication channel that things can happen. There's obviously the easiest answer is have people in every one of the teams, like try and have those cross-functional team when you have the different talents and you can all work together. I hesitate a bit because one thing that come to mind is like the other side of it, which is like for something like data engineering might lead to a kind of misbalance, as in you might have so many data engineers because you have so many cross-functional team, and then you end up realizing it's okay, my communication is excellent because the data engineers are so close to every single team and it's all working really well. But now I have 3 times the amount of data engineers I probably should have because they're all like siloed into their own thing, and you don't have this potentially the same impact. You can have a smaller pool of talent by having them have their own team and being able to collaborate with one another. So I don't have a clear answer, actually. It's something that I've seen both sides of it. I've seen kind of like teams working with trying to integrate communication with the others and have them brought in, but like the communication is a bit more difficult. And I've seen the other side with bringing the talent in every single one of the team, and that also has its downfall. So I would say I don't really have a clear answer on this one.
Nice. João, do you have some clarity to add to this answer?
Yeah, I really like the way that you went, Ben, because I think this is highlighted at the moment that you really scale your company. Then you have multiple innovation teams dealing with different flows, different tools, different goals. And giving my view as a backend software engineer here, usually when you are developing something, you need tools, you need infra, you need some basic stuff that requires a certain expertise, I would say, that perhaps your team doesn't have or would need time to build it. And then if you introduce those internal developer platforms that I mentioned, if you want to create a level of abstraction on this complex topic, so it can, creating this infrastructure that I mentioned, for example, could be as easy as pressing a button. This, whatever this button triggers, may solve my team's problem, but not yours, Ben, because your team has a more specific need. So I think this question is related with how do you balance what level of abstraction you create? How do you put some flexibility there? And I think the key for making this happen is creating some sort of feedback loop in between the teams and whoever is in charge of creating these abstractions. So what does my team need? What do your team then needs? What's your team needs, Sarah? And then, of course, you need to focus your efforts on something. So what can I develop to enable 80% of these teams, let's say? So I think it's about knowing their needs and making a decision that you would put less effort on and delivering more value. Because then you removed this complexity from the majority of these teams. And then when you develop this platform or whatever you are developing to create this level of abstraction, try to make it API first, for example, so each team can at least customize something. So it's not like you press a button and that's it. You can't customize anything. Then you are adding some flexibility on it. And my last point is Imagine that you already have that. You have your internal developer platform solving 80% of the needs. It is API first. Try to create some open source mindset around it so the teams feel empowered to collaborate. So if my team is not within that 80% range and we are still suffering with context switching because we need infra expertise within our team, we at least feel empowered to suggest or even contribute ourselves to that platform. So the whole company feels empowered to make that tool better. So it's not one team's responsibility.
I really love your answer there, João, especially about the open source and everyone contributing. I've seen this often in organizations where you want to allow autonomy within all of your teams so that the teams themselves can decide on what tools they use, what languages they use, etc. But when the complexity becomes massive, so every team is choosing, let's say one team writes in C and the other one in C++, and the other one decides to do everything in Java, and then you want to change teams, it can be quite chaotic. Like it gets harder because you have to change and learn all of these new systems, etc. So the companies try to simplify it, especially larger organizations, by creating platforms or things to make the experience easier for developers so that not only can you deploy something quicker because you have this tool there, but also that people can move more at ease between the different teams, and there's more flexibility in where you can work, and you don't always have to onboard from scratch. So the abstraction, like how much do you want to say, hey, this is what we're going to use in the company, and how much do you allow for the flexibility between the teams is quite a question. I really believe in treating these platform teams as enablement teams. So they are there to enable the different teams around so that they can do their work better, they can work more smooth. And another thing is to have a product mindset. Their customers are developers, and there should be a product owner for these platforms. Their stakeholders are the developers. Therefore, communication is key because you can't have a good product without communication. You can't prioritize. You don't know what's bringing customer value in the end unless you have this communication, constant communication with the community. What do you need, etc. So I believe having platform teams that are treated like products, their customers are and stakeholders are the developers. You have a real product owner, you're prioritizing based on the needs of these customers within your organization. And of course, good products, what they need. Like you said, open API, it's a lot more approachable. It's a lot easier to use than having just a system that you need to fully integrate into yours. Can you connect to it easily? Is it really enabling you to do better work? So I believe that's the way to have this empowerment within your organization, take away the complexity and make things easier, but still allowing your teams to be autonomous as much as they need to be in order to be successful.
Thank you so much for bringing that, because that's like something I believe 100%. Like a good developer experience team or enablement team is this. It's a product mindset. What you're delivering is like your developer experience is your product. Your developers and the people that are part of that whole process of creating value for your business are your customers, and you want to make sure that you deliver on that 100%. I wanted to reply as well to João, because you've mentioned making it easy for the teams to create their own thing if they have a need. And I think that's quite important, this open source approach of enabling them to not just do what they need to do, but also, especially as you grow, like you're saying, you might not be able, as your main developer experience team, to cover 100% of the needs of every single team, because you're going to have outliers, you're going to have particularities, and you want to, as a product-focused team, you're going to cover the 80% first, because that's your biggest value that you're going to deliver. But you want to make sure that you still allow the teams to cover that last build gap themselves. But one of the things that helps with that balance, or maybe that is key to ensure that works well, is ownership. If you have that empowerment of those teams to build their own little tooling or little things to support themselves, then there needs to be clear understanding of ownership, of support, to make sure that you don't end up in a situation where there is a multitude of things created, no one there to maintain them, and then it can go downhill really quickly. And so making sure that there's a clear understanding of who owns what, and when you start building something, even before you start building something, who's going to own it, who's going to support it long term. Basically, DevOps,
like a real
or
product.
internal tooling, like it's the same thing, right? So just because it's not something you deliver to your clients as like a product company doesn't mean that little piece of code doesn't need a DevOps mindset, doesn't need to understand who's going to support
100%.
it. So that was just the one thing to add on this open source mindset, is ownership and support is a big part of it as well.
Yeah.
It's pretty important.
Yeah, definitely. So let's move. Let's move on. How do you measure the effectiveness of your work? I think João, you're the next one to answer first.
My answer will be pretty quick, and making that in practice is pretty complex. So I think the way to measure that is indeed to come back to the feedback loops that we talked about. So really, any feedback loop that is relevant for your company. So if you really think, if we come back, for example, to that unit test example that I mentioned, imagine that it takes only 2 minutes. It's pretty quick, right? If you go to drink a coffee, it takes more than 2 minutes, so you will be fine. But imagine that it can be optimized to 15 seconds. The thing about these feedback loops, be it unit test or the time it takes to launch a new service in production, or if you have any issue, you open a ticket to a technical support team, and then it takes 2 weeks also to get that answer. These things, they add up. If you have a team, if your company scaled and you have more than 1,000 engineers, and all of them are running those batch of tests that take 2 minutes, and you run them really 20 times a day, each developer, they add up. So find the feedback loops that are relevant for you and measure them. And I think Ben approached this also. I mean, gather the data, then you can make an informed decision about it, right? I think that's the first thing. So imagine that you have all those metrics on the feedback loops that matter to you. And the other thing that I would add is measure the mental health and happiness of your teams. Also a pretty complex thing, but once you see that happening, it's pretty common nowadays for companies to have like these quarterly form evaluations, or having structures like deliberating structures to have those conversations, so you can measure that in during one-on-ones also. So you can approach this in different ways, but I would focus on measuring these feedback loops, be it whatever matters for your team, for your company, and also the mental health, because mental health is linked with how much context switch do you need. If people are going to the state of burnout, if you feel happy, if you feel empowered, included, it goes a long way. I would focus on those 2 key areas.
Thank you, João. And Benjamin, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I think it like what João was saying around like those feedback cycles is definitely important to have metrics and to be able to evaluate those. I would say one interesting thing to think about when devising those metrics is to try and think about it as a product and as a user-centric metric. You'll once again go back to you're delivering value of a product for your customers, which are the developers. So if you're looking at the feedback cycle for testing on a PR, for example, what you're interested is not just the time it takes for the test to run. What you really want to measure is from a PR opening to a PR being able to be merged. Like that would be your golden metric. And then you can break it down into smaller components, but trying to approach it from this user-centric perspective of like, what is the flow that my developer, my user is taking? What is the thing that matters? Looking at delivery, you might want to have a look at time to recovery on a hotfix when there's an error that happens in production. And what you're looking at here is from something happening to your developer being alerted to something being able to be fixed. And once again, you get there by putting yourself in the shoes of the developer and trying to understand what is their workflow, what are they doing. If you have large teams and you have to cover different aspects, sit down with them, try and walk through that journey with them, tell them how is your work, what do you do, ask questions to try and understand how they're functioning, what are the steps they're taking. And once you have a good understanding of that, then you can devise good and effective metrics. And I would also add a second one. When you have all those well-defined and easy like metrics that you can have stats about that you can really drive to improve, there are things that are more difficult to gather. And you touch a bit upon it when we talk about mental health, happiness, and things like that. But I feel like because it's such a broad topic, enablement and developer experience, there's a lot of things that can fall into that. And what I've seen that has worked quite well in some of the teams that I've been into is the developer experience, the mobile enablement teams were running regular surveys with the developers. So asking open-ended questions and asking them, what are the things that are currently blocking you? What are the things that you feel we could improve? Basically, it's your ideal scenario for the product thing because your users are right there. They're in the same company as you. You have direct access to them. So run customer surveys and experiments with them because they're right there. They can answer the questions and you can get a lot of very valuable data that you might not have thought of by just asking them. So I would add that aspect of trying to go to your users and ask them what they want.
Yeah. Really great, both of your answers. Benjamin, you touched on kind of the answer that I was going towards. I believe in simplification. I find that very often so much energy is wasted on things that don't really need to be worked on because you get into this mindset, okay, everything has to be measured. We need to have a quantitative measurement for absolutely everything. And we're going to try to fix every single small thing. I believe in starting on the outside. And that is, what are you trying to produce? In the end, if you're a product organization, you're trying to produce more business value with all of the processes that are involved. That's DevOps the whole way, and developer experience, as I said, is a part of that. So is your machine working is the first question. So are we producing more value to our customers? Are we bringing in more customers? Are they attracted to what we're doing? Are we becoming more efficient in the way that we're doing stuff? These are the outer level things. And let's say you notice that customer value is decreasing. Customers are getting unhappy with the results. They're starting to disconnect with your product. That is a red alert. There's something going on underneath there. And then you need to start diving into it. So what's going on here? And then you start pulling back the layers and you start measuring the things that are underneath that, like first asking why. Why are you, maybe you're unhappy because you're not getting new features fast enough. Okay, fast enough. That's triggering something. We need to measure what fast enough means. Is it because we're not deploying enough releases? are we deploying a lot of releases, but what we deploy is not usable? Those are two different problems. And then you dive into those problems and you try to fix the problems that are there. Very often, I've seen new leaders go into an organization and you try to fix something that doesn't need to be fixed. You have this perfectly functioning team that is producing great results. They're happy. And someone goes in there and says, okay, now we need to change it and you can actually break the equilibrium of that team. You can like fuck it up because you overdo it, or you focus on, let's say, the details that work on another team and you try to bring it into this team, and it actually breaks the equilibrium because there's so many elements there. Maybe in one particular team, it takes a bit longer for a test to result, but it's okay for that team because there's something else that's going on really good there. They're producing quality. They have enough time to think. And maybe it's a team that needs that time to think. And they're actually more connected to their customer than another team, which is producing tests all the time really, really fast. So it's a complex system. It's this big system that's in place. And just going in and doing the same in every single team, I think, doesn't work. I also believe so much in developer experience that if your developers are not happy, if they're on the verge of burnout, if they are disconnected, you're going to see that at the surface. They become disconnected, unmotivated, your quality starts to decrease, your customer experience is going to start to decrease. There's going to be less communication. They're going to be siloed off. So you will see that at the surface, because I do not think that a product can become successful, or even if you're a service delivery organization delivering a service to a customer, that it will be successful if your developers are unhappy. Now there is the question of, are you the one that's going to, let's say, fix the cancer when it's already in stage 4 because now you see it? Or are you going to do the preemptive things to make sure that the cancer doesn't come? That's so important. So you need to already consider your developer experience to begin with, even if you don't see the red flags at the surface. I read somewhere, and I found it amazing. The CEO of a company, quite a bit, like big one, not a giant one. It was like 350 people or something. And he makes sure every single week to have 5 one-on-ones with different people in his organization. And he does it every single week. So over time, he actually talks with everyone, have conversations, talk with people. Surveys are great, but they miss what's really important. You can't shortcut it. Just by having a conversation with a, let's say, junior engineer, and he has this experience that's valid. Maybe you're talking with a leader and they're feeling that they're not being empowered, even though everyone in their team is being empowered, that they don't have the support that they need. That kind of stuff doesn't always come from the surveys. Maybe you don't feel like your voice is heard in a team, or you can't speak up, or you're feeling a little bit blue and you don't really know what it is. That comes from conversations. So I really encourage that no matter what your level is in leadership, try to connect with the people in your organization, have those conversations, talk about it. When it comes to addressing issues and measuring stuff, don't overmeasure, don't overdo it, keep it simple and work your way down. But when it comes to the preemptive care, start that from day one, even before you see the cancer at the surface. It's going to make a big difference.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring, Sarah. And I also see a link on with making people feel safe and having meaningful conversations and structures around it, right? Because now that you mention about the CEO having these quick conversations with people across the company, I can imagine in huge corporations that if I receive out of nowhere an invitation in my calendar for a talk with the CEO, I would freak out. Like, I mean, how to approach these conversations. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
So
it's quite important that this person, that's the CEO. I mean, imagine I'm a director of engineering. And I think I'm very approachable. When I have a conversation with someone, I help relieve that stress. So I would go into the conversation like, yeah, I can imagine well, maybe I would even let the whole organization know what I'm doing. So everyone knows that if they have this meeting from me, it's because you're one of the five. So that's part of my communication. I would share with the whole company that this is my vision, that I think every single individual in my organization is important. And you will have a conversation with me this year. That would be like my, let's say, statement that I share with the company. So people at least have that stress away. And then, of course, they're talking with the frigging CEO. That's stressful, especially if you think about different cultures, etc. But you can make it easier in the way that you talk with people. I try in general, when I speak, I don't use a lot of complex vocabulary. I don't go into technical talk very often. I mean, you would even not know that I'm a software engineer half the time if you would talk with me, because I try to connect with people in a way which feels like we are equals, by also stepping into my vulnerability. I will share a story which, shows that I can make mistakes and that I'm just like you. And that takes a certain kind of empathy, wanting to connect and take and actually bringing it into the conversation. So I think that leaders can do a lot to help the individuals in their organization feel seen and heard, by also taking off the chip on your shoulder and pushing that ego aside and being like, we are just people in this room. I remember how it was when I was a developer and when I did this thing, like, yeah, or this was stressful, and then let them join the conversation and really listen to them.
Yeah, yeah. Spot on, Sarah. So if you are a CEO listening to this episode, don't just schedule these one-on-ones just for the sake of doing it.
Yeah.
There's some more
Yeah.
underneath it.
Absolutely. And I think like also what you were touching upon on like the leaders has a responsibility of being approachable and also of like setting an example, taking that chip off the shoulder. Like to me, it resonated as well with a really good way of improving developer experience, improving this ability of iteration to happen, is fostering a failure culture, like a culture where it's safe to fail. And that starts from leaders being able to openly share mess ups, times where like you completely screwed up and it's fine, and showcasing that's an opportunity to grow, not something that you should be ashamed of or afraid to share or afraid to raise up. And like you said, like this is the perfect opportunity as a leader to start that conversation and to make it happen, because it's only once the leaders have taken that step that people will feel comfortable raising up their hand, asking for help, showing when they failed and learning from it. And if you don't, then they'll be protective. They'll try and hide it because they don't want to be judged. They don't want to be seen in a bad way. And that is very detrimental to your overall team experience and developer experience.
Yeah, I really believe that having a management role or scrum master role or something like this, it's a role. Leadership is something which I try to cultivate and teach and share with every single person that I work with, regardless if you are a junior developer, product owner, or a manager. Leadership is a skill set in itself, and we all can encompass it. So all of us that are sitting in the room together, I don't care if your hat is a software engineer or a product owner, or you happen to be an engineering manager right now. We are all equals. We just have a different role right now. I know that I can be a director of engineering in one moment and a coach in another. And I'm also a developer, and we will be switching these hats throughout our careers. And we're all sitting in the same room. I'm not better than you because I happen to be a director right now. And I think that is a mindset that every manager or director or whatever needs to encompass. This software engineer that's in the room can be a better and more effective leader than I am, because leadership is just a skill set. And we happen to be wearing different hats, and we all deserve respect, and we all deserve to be seen and heard, and we're all human. And when you step into that same room with people, people start to feel more comfortable to just be and be who they are.
Yeah.
I mean,
said.
yeah. I mean, I guess you both have been my reports. Benjamin is now my report, and João, you were my report in the past. Have you ever felt as though I'm in a higher place than you in the way that I treat you?
No, this approach that you mentioned, it really works.
Yeah. I hold you both in such high regard, and I learn also so much from you. I mean, that's why I love having these partnerships with both of you. So we are in this together. And I think that more leaders need to take on this mindset.
Yeah, I think it's really felt, especially that aspect of like showing that you can all learn from each other. Like no matter who you are, like whoever you interact with, be it like you're a very senior person interacting with a very junior developer coming in, you have something to learn from them. There's something
Always.
to take away from an interaction with someone.
Yeah. I learn stuff from my 14-year-old daughter sometimes. She has some really wise advice. So just keep an open mind and take that ego and that chip on your shoulder and just toss it aside. It's not going to help you or anyone else you work with.
Indeed. I mean, I can't even count how many times I've seen it. You wouldn't expose your opinion because you feel that you don't have the knowledge, you don't have the expertise, you don't have the role or authority. But I've seen it happening if you do it anyways without fear to be judged or to be wrong. Whatever you say will spark great ideas on others' minds, and then the direction that your team was going may completely change by a single thing that you mention. And that's very powerful.
Yeah, sparks are so powerful. I mean, I don't care how senior I get in my leadership journey. Without the sparks from everyone in the room, I would not be able to even close be where I'm at today. It's like, it's exponential what sparks do. So let's move on to the next question. Have any of you had experiences where the perception of developers and the reality on the ground were vastly different? Benjamin, this is yours.
Yes, I actually have, and I think it touches upon something that you've mentioned in the previous question. You talked about how you want to avoid changing things that don't need to be changed and rely on the team's self-sustained way of working and the way they have. And that's true for the most part, but there is some caveats to that. And I think that is where like my experience came in on the cases where developer perception and reality can be quite varied. And I think it comes from a byproduct of what we are. We talk about our customers and the product that we're building is this developer experience and our developers, right? But one thing to understand is you're working with a captive audience. This is not a free market of products where your users can just back up and go and find a more effective product elsewhere. They're trapped. You are delivering the only product that they can use. And that has biases built into it, especially for established teams that have been working for a long time. The dreaded, well, it's how it is. It's how it's always worked type thing always is at risk of being there. And I've seen it happen where I was interacting with developers and asking them questions about things. And it took them, because I was asking open questions like, what are your blockers? What are things that you feel could be improved in your workflow? And it took them 45 minutes to get to the point where they would mention that their PRs fail 50% of the time. And they just rerun it. But like, to me, that's like a huge problem. If like half of the time you're trying to do something, you can't rely on the results that is given to you, that's a massive problem, right?
That's it.
It didn't even come to their minds because that was the norm. That was business as usual. Mm-hmm. That was this external thing that we just rely on. It is how it is. And so their perspective was like, CI system's all right. You know, so like, they were not saying it's amazing, but they're like, yeah, whatever, it's fine. That's reality was it's terrible. It's horrible. Yeah. Please fix it.
Yeah.
So I would say there is really this aspect of you have to keep in mind that there is huge biases that come from they're trapped, they don't have any other alternatives. Depending on how long the teams have been in place, they may have really strong established practices. And while you want to be very careful to not disrupt things that don't need to be disrupted, at the same time, you have to take with a grain of salt what people say and dig, really try and understand things, because there are things that might be hidden there of this misunderstanding of what is possible. And a lot of that comes from education. Like, how did I get them to say that? Is because I spent time talking with them about what exists out there, what might be, try and bring them into that mindset of understanding what they should strive for, what they should be able to reach out for. And once they have a better understanding, then those things come up more. So to try and avoid that mismatch between perception and reality, the best thing you can do is try and educate your developers on the concepts of DevOps, of DevEx, what is feasible, encourage them to go to conferences, talk to other companies.
Conferences are great.
Have all those ideas coming in that
Meetups.
can break that established kind of lock in their mind of what is the realm of possible.
Yeah.
So
And
that you can have those
especially,
ideas coming in.
I'm thinking, Benjamin, the mobile world. Having been a software engineer in the non-mobile world and then becoming a director of an agency which is mobile specific, I felt that I saw a lot of these, like you said, boxes that you guys were putting yourself into as this is the way it is. And I'm coming from another perspective, like, well, I've seen it differently in the world that I'm in. Maybe we need to break down some of those walls and allow those mobile engineers to see the big world of software development, because it's quite progressed in the last years. Do you agree,
Yeah.
Benjamin?
Absolutely. Like,
Yeah.
absolutely. There is this idea of trying to learn from others, trying to go and broaden your perspective as much as possible so that you don't see only what's in front of you, but understand
Yeah.
it better.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
João,
And what you guys mentioned, it can happen in a small scale. Let's see something very specific within the team, just like you mentioned, Ben, or something that, I mean, grabbing knowledge from conferences, for example, and making it more broad. The same thing happened, and I will apply this view on the customer value that you deliver at the end of your sprint. For let's say that you work with Scrum, you have 2-week sprints. Then your sprint is finished. You actually finished everything that was within your sprint backlog. Yeah, all your stories were estimated with, I don't know,
well,
13 points, and then you have this huge ass volume of stories delivered. The velocity is pretty high, and then the team has this feeling that yes, we are rocking it, and then we move on. And there is no feedback loop at all to check. For example, Sarah, you mentioned about IT versus business. Imagine that we wouldn't have a sprint review where we would close these loops and gather feedback and check what was delivered. Was it what we expected? We don't know exactly the why we are doing this. We just know the what and a lot about the how. And we keep doing this over and over and over. If you ask the team, hey guys, what's your developer experience look like? How do you feel? Well, we feel great. We are pretty quick at what we do. We are efficient, and yeah, nothing to say. But if you really dig deep there, if you poke it a little bit, ask the customer, you will see that that's not the case. And I think this is what the direction that this question goes, right? The team itself feels everything is fine and optimal, but in reality, it's not really. I mean, what's the connection with the customer? What's the purpose? To what end you are doing things? And should we focus that much in velocity after all? Is this the metric that we should use? Because I've seen this over and over, really.
yeah, velocity is not the right measure for how successful a team is. I want to bring this to just a personal experience, actually. As a developer, I was a person which I don't function well when I have interrupts. When I write code, I can only explain it as it's like I'm entering into this labyrinth in my brain, and I'm like digging deep, and I get into this like maze. And when I'm in the maze, something happens. I start to know all of the ways. My productivity is increasing. I feel energized. My brain just goes into this like massive logical and high functioning mode. And when I'm interrupted, it's like I'm ripped out of the maze, and it takes me quite some time to get back to where I was, because like I said, it's like a real entering and being ripped out, and I may even be lost. Like, where was I? When I try to go back, I'm like trying to figure out where I'm at. So that's the baseline of what I'm trying to explain. So when I would develop code, I would try to protect myself from interrupts. So putting up kind of walls, not allowing people to interrupt me. And I would get into this maze and sometimes be in this maze for not just hours. I mean, I'm neurodiverse. I have extreme hyperfocus. I can stay in this maze for 12 hours without a bathroom break. It's crazy. That's the hyperfocus that I can get into. Highly productive when it comes to writing code. And you would think that this is a way towards success. However, as you can see, for me to do that, I block out everyone around me. I block out customers from interacting with me, from my fellow developers asking me a question. So in my mind, I feel like I have made it through this maze. I've written all of this code. I've developed these 10 different functions. I even developed functions that were asked for because I am in this like epiphany of energized productivity. I feel successful because nobody ripped me out of my maze. And you don't know how disappointing it is when you finally do leave that maze and you share this result with your team or with your manager or customer. And they're like, but that's not what I wanted. Like, I didn't ask for these functions, or yeah, that's great, but it's not even close to what I needed. And you feel heartbroken. You feel like unheard, unseen. You feel destroyed. You feel like as if you're not appreciated. And I used to take that very personal. I used to really feel pain when that would happen, even like they had a vendetta against me. But I realized that it was because I had blocked myself away. I didn't produce a small bit of code and then go ask and say, hey, is this kind of where you want to go? And then go back into it. And then, oh, is this okay? In that second scenario, I may feel less successful because I'm not in that highly productive, energized mode. I'm going in and out of the maze. I'm not highly productive. It's not as, let's say, amazing or 100% as it would be if I would be in that mode. However, from the outside, from the perspective of the customer and the people I'm working with, they find that better. So their perception of the result is better because I'm actually showing them, even if it's broken results, the broken results so that they can help direct it and shift the direction of it so that I can go back in and do it. And even though I may code 1/3 of the efficiency that I would in the other scenario, for them, that's more successful. So that's something that I kind of see it a little bit in relation as what you were saying, João. That team, which is like getting those sprints done, working highly effective, their velocity is increasing, they feel fucking amazing. But are they delivering what the customer needs? Is it a facade, this greatness, this great way of working? Because actually it's complex. Sometimes having things less effective and efficient and having a bit more interrupts and not being able to be in that highly productive mode is better for the end solution and for the customer, and you're actually doing better work. So it's complicated, and that's just what I want to say. It's not it's like when you become a leader and you think, I have I'm not producing anything. I have all these meetings in my calendar. And then somebody tells you, actually, that is productivity. It's your job to connect with people, not just to make some presentation or document. And so you have to redefine it, like what success looks like. And that's where you can get these missed expectations of what that looks like from the ground versus what's at the top.
You're touching on a really interesting point there that I think is worth like really highlighting, which is you mentioned feeling like what is your success, what you feel good about achieving. And like I think a huge part of being able to break that, like what is that perception, is to rewrite that, like find ways to celebrate success in what is a defined success for the business. Because yes, like the default mode for a developer might be to just feel good about how much code they've written and how well they've been able to produce. But if you find ways to celebrate the right things, and it might be like, you know, shifting that perspective is like, oh, how we've showcased that, like how we achieved that, showing this to this person. Or if you're trying to encourage more knowledge sharing, is how effectively you may have coached someone else. But trying to bring all those other ways of celebrating success, then you can start shifting that person and that whole team's perspective on how they value themselves. Yeah. And then once
they feel
people
worthy,
start valuing themselves for all those other things, they don't want to feel guilty and they don't feel angry when they have to stop to help someone else, or when they have to stop to go ask.
And it's really, like you said, anger and guilt, like all of those feelings are tied into that.
So it's try and find the way of celebrating those successes in new ways. And I think that's, by doing that, you can help alleviating what you were talking about, like this idea of, oh, I wasn't as productive. Like in the ideal way, what is the most productive for the business should be how you feel fulfilled yourself, and finding ways to bridge that gap is like really key.
Bridging your feelings to creating real impact in an organization. Like that's, I mean, you hear me talk about it all the time, Benjamin. It's taking that personal passion and drives and vision and missions that we have and bridging it into impact in the business. And that's, that's complicated. João, you were going to say something?
No, 100% what you guys said. I think we went to a good direction with this question.
Yeah. So how do you gain executive support for DevEx function? Who did I ask first last time? I think I'll ask João.
Yeah. When we focus again on investing in developer experience, something that comes to my mind to really, let's say, get a budget to make that happen or increase the one that you already have, is to focus a bit on return on investment. Because of course, you will spend money and it's a budget that will be distributed to all teams that you have in the whole organization. So this investment is spread by increasing, for example, the developer enablement of all of them, which is a good point. You can highlight, or even I would even show this conversation that we are recording here to the executives to get more understanding about.
And you're allowed to share this with your executives if you need to.
Yes, yeah, please do. And by showcasing some of these success stories, for example, is another way to highlight what DevEx means and how this budget will be a great choice to be put in practice, I would say. But one key thing that people usually forget is that having a great developer experience is linked with retention, which is a pretty important topic. If you have a very bad developer experience in overall, so it could be really anything, people will leave the company eventually. And really, how much does it cost to have that vacancy open, to search for someone that matches the skills that you have, and to stop delivering value in the meanwhile, right? Because you don't have the enough people within the teams. And then you will, of course, need to, it will cost more. It will need efforts for the onboarding team, for the hiring team. I mean, it's complex. So don't forget about retention. Good developer experience leads to people wanting to stick with the company and boost the missions and values of your company.
Nice said, João. Benjamin, do you have something to add?
Very, very well said. I like that you mentioned this idea of trying to educate and trying to surface the value. One thing I would add on that is one of the complexity of talking about developer experience, and we've mentioned it a few times, is how broad it is, right? It touches on so many things.
Exactly.
But it's actually also a strength, because if you think about it, that also means that you have levers that you can action that impacts the business in very different ways. And then you can surface value for the business around developer experience in various ways, depending on what the business needs. And I think that's the first step to getting buy-in, is understanding what is the business needing at this point. And I really appreciate that you brought in retention, because that was the thing. I worked on a team that when we came in, the business was in hypergrowth. Developer retention and attractiveness was a huge part. So then you can focus on your developer experience from that perspective. That's your angle, that's your metric, that's the objective the business is trying to achieve, which is becoming a tech pool, becoming the best place people can work at. So you can keep people in, keep developers happy, and attract a new talent. And that is the objective you have. And you can work towards developer experience in that perspective. But then things shifted. We're not exactly in the same environment anymore. And maybe your business needs to now focus a bit more on saving costs and productivity. That's also things that you can action from a developer experience standpoint. Maybe then you'll spend a bit more time focusing on limiting like developer idleness, trying to have as much productivity as possible by shortening your feedback cycles on build or on deployment, other than like before you may have focused on the ease of the tooling and some of the things. Now you might focus more on time. Both are valuable things that you can spend your time on, and you might just prioritize them differently in ways that you can then surface back to the stakeholders on saying like, okay, look, initially you could go back and say, look, developers are really happy, you have a really high retention rate, and you're attracting easily new talent. And then now that the focus of the business has shifted, you might start talking to them in a different term and say, look, we've saved X amount of man hours last month thanks to those things that we've deployed. So I think the key to getting buy-in, in addition to obviously sharing and trying to evangelize for those concepts, is also to try and talk in the right ways, understand what is your business needing at that moment, and then try and bridge that gap and talk in those terms. Try and understand what is the key thing that we're trying to achieve and see how you can, with developer experience, accomplish that goal.
100%, Benjamin. That's kind of the direction that I wanted to go. When you get to the director level, or let's say the board level, in the end, it's related to money, business value. You're concerned about your market, because if you have more market, then in the end, you get more money. If you keep your customers happy, you have these cash cows in place, you have a certain amount of money, you improve your efficiency, things cost less, so you end up with more profits in the end. Commercial value, if you can get some big customer to pay something big for what you're doing because it's innovative and creative, then you get more money. So if you want to get buy-in from the people at the top, I know it sounds kind of sad to think that it's all about money, but in the end, business is about being able to live financially in our normal lives. So make sure to make it really clear to the people at the top how your efforts are connected to that. So it could be that there's some business OKRs. They have already done the groundwork for you. So this year, like you said, Benjamin, they might be focusing on having a big talent pool. It gets a bit easier. That's your focus. That's what you want to prove. Your improved efforts and developer experience will raise. But it could be that their focus this year is about decreasing costs or something like that. So then it's efficiency value that they're focused on this year. So make sure that your efforts are connected to that and make it as simple and easy to understand as possible. Take out all of the mumbo jumbo things, but really, if I do A and B, it will equal C, which means a company will survive because we'll have more money. So speak in business ways, speak in business terms. It's in the end, of course, you want your developers to be happy, but just having happy developers will not sustain your business. But having, like I said before, I'm 100% convinced that if you do not have a good developer experience, you will not produce more value. So make sure that your leaders see the connection and experiment. Show them the experiments. Give them timelines. Give them a hypothesis. If I do this will change. This metric will change. If it's a short-term hypothesis and you can prove it with data and how it increases a business value, you're going to get more and more buy-in. And the more successful you are at presenting these experiments, they're going to trust you more and give you more budget to do what you need. So is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
Just maybe one thing on what you mentioned, like the last one around when it comes to money, like if you're in a situation where your company is in efficiency mode, right? What really truly matters is efficiency. Don't forget, economy of scale applies quite well to that. You'd be surprised by how much impact even smallish changes can have when you are multiplying them by the workload of people across the business throughout the day and throughout a month. Even a medium-sized company with like medium-sized team, you'll probably have easily 300, 400, 500 PRs a month. That's not outlandish, right? If you imagine that, even if you do like a 10-minute, 20-minute time save on like your feedback flow for that can add up really quickly. And the thing to keep in mind is developers are skilled workers. They're expensive. For most businesses, the biggest cost is probably your talent pool. It's like the time of the people working in your business. So finding ways to improve efficiency will have huge cost implications. Yeah. So don't think that just because you're making developers' life easier, it doesn't have money impact. You can find definitely huge cost savings in doing so. So yeah, if you're in this situation, you feel a bit trapped, not being able to advocate for it, just have a look at like your workflows within the teams and then see how much time you could save. That's like an easy way to get started, I guess, on getting some buy-in.
Yeah, and just like João said, you save 2 minutes, multiply it by 1,000 employees. It makes a very easy calculation for a leader to encompass. I also have one other tip here. Convince your leaders in giving you the expectations and allowing you the how. So what are the expectations on the boundary line? And tell them or convince them as to taking the need to micromanage the exact things that you do as something that you're going to be saving them time by them not having to think about that, and that you will deliver on the expectations at the borderline. By doing that, you have this pool of experimentation that you can do as a team, and you can keep showing the leader that you're giving them the expectations even a bit more, and they will give you more and more freedom. For example, it's very hard to convince a leader that going on a 3-day retreat with your team is going to save money for the business. That already they jolt it, they see the cost, they don't get it. How is this going to save? But if you show we are going to deliver more value this month, and you know, as a team, by going on this retreat, it's going to increase a connection, it's going to increase your productivity. You may even have more sparks and ideas and etc. That's just the how, so try to make it so that the leader doesn't have to worry about the how, but only sees at the borderline what you're producing and that you're giving them what they need. I think it would even be kinder to the leaders, because like I said, if you give them this 3-month or a 3-day retreat, they only see cost. They don't see the connection as to how this cost is going to save the company money. So it makes it hard for them to say yes to that. Anything else to add here?
We covered a lot.
Yeah. So we have 3 more questions. How about we choose one of them?
I really like the last one.
Same. I really like the last one as well.
Yeah. I'm also not so much for the 9 and 10, so I'm happy that you guys did that. So let's just skip to the last question. What are the advantages and disadvantages of having a dedicated function for developer experience versus embedding DevEx personnel in stream-aligned development teams? Let's start with Benjamin.
This is a question that I've heard a lot. And it's there's many different ways of going about it. I don't think there is like one perfect way of going about implementing DevEx within your teams. I feel like having a team dedicated to it has some advantages when it comes to organization and it makes it a little bit easier for things to not be left behind. What I mean by that is it's easy for, especially when you're not a business that is very familiar with developer experience and with developer kind of enablement, it's very easy for those objectives within a team that is also delivering product value for your business to be left behind or to be put on a second stage, as in, well, we could spend some time and improve that, but we also have this feature to ship, so let's work on the feature because that brings value to the business straight away. Because one of them is more of a slow incremental improvement that ensures that your machinery is functioning well, and the other one is directing clear value that is easier to see. And so for that reason, when you have a team that is the sole objective is to focus on delivering good developer experience, there's nothing else that can take precedent. There's nothing that can overshadow it. That's your objective. You can now focus and think like we mentioned before, think like a product team. Because your team is focusing on this product, then they can really ensure that they deliver good developer experience, and they're focused on treating it as any other product, as understanding what should we measure, what should we look at. Whereas it's easier for this to be a bit muddled when you have people that are embedded within the teams. That's not saying that it's not possible with it, but I would say it's definitely easier to keep things aligned and have an objective and a perspective as a team when you have a team dedicated to it.
Nice. And João, what do you think about this?
I totally see what you mean, Ben. If you have a dedicated team for DevEx, the focus of that team will be to prioritize DevEx. It also means that it's easier for the team to seek for knowledge and get expertise on DevEx, because you don't have other, let's say, KRs to work with. You don't have other goals to create the need of time management around it, so we can really make DevEx happen. Also, I think that by having a dedicated team, you gain that ability to zoom out and enable multiple teams at once. So that developer platform that I mentioned before, to have that button so you could create your cloud infra, for example, you could gather the needs of multiple teams and tackle it at once by creating that API first platform to make that happen. On the other side, you are not within the team itself. So it's difficult for you to really understand what their needs are. So if we think about on the opposite side, if we only have embedded teams, the communication is way easier because you really know what you're talking about, what you want to achieve, what your tech stack is. The scope is smaller, so it's easy to find that 80% solution that would aggregate the most value for the team. My view is that you shouldn't go 100% embedded, you shouldn't go 100% dedicated. The key is to find the right mix. You need to have these talks about DevEx within the teams themselves, but you also need to have a dedicated team to sort of orchestrate these initiatives, let's say. So why not have smaller dedicated team while also enabling circles within your company to really boost the DevEx idea across the organization, right? So my view is that you can really remove the downsides of having either one or another, but find sort of a mix that would work.
Yeah, João, I do believe there needs to be a kind of governance. So there's someone that's responsible that DevEx happens. There's someone that is responsible for the OKRs, and that there is a responsibility in making sure that there is one person in every team, for example, that has this hat on. So that's needed. However, I don't think having an ivory tower will help the situation. I would recommend to use holacracy in this case, that you have, let's say it's someone in management that has this as their governance. They make sure that this circle exists, but that the people that are in the circle are the right people. They're the people which are passionate about developer experience. They have talents in developer experience. They have some kind of drive about this, that they are the ones that are participating in this circle to make sure that the right initiatives are happening, that if there needs to be a new product platform team, it's coming from them. These are their ideas, etc. And I would treat this DevEx role within the team similar to a Scrum Master role. So you have a Scrum Master can be a developer and also a Scrum Master. It's like two hats. And somebody in this team is having this hat of the developer experience hat. They make sure to get the experience from the team. They also make sure that the team knows about what's going on in the main circle. They make sure that things are happening, etc. But as Scrum Masters, if you remember, João, when I was your leader, you were a Scrum Master. We had also Scrum Master Guild. And we met every week to discuss the problems that were occurring. And we coached each other in helping each other through these problems. So this was the coming together and making sure that you have a way of improving the individual teams, but also you're embedded in the team. As you said, you're part of the team. You're not this stranger at the border. So I think only by being in the teams can you really know what the developer experience is. You're also going to have the buy-in from those that are with you because they will connect with you. They know that you have their back. But you also need to have treat DevX as a craft. So it's an actual guild in itself, a circle in itself, in which there are learnings. How can we do DevX better? There are initiatives. What platforms do we need to increase this, etc. So you have the right people in those circles making sure that stuff happens. So I think ideally it's hybrid. It's a mix of a craft, a hat which people within the teams can carry, that you have at least one wearing this hat in each team. if you have a team that doesn't have anyone that wants to wear this hat, you may want to move your teams around to make sure that there's at least one developer that has this hat in your team. And if you have this guild where you can have tacticals, you can make sure that you're addressing the problems that are occurring within the teams, that you're there to support each other and moving forward in this way. So you do need the governance part to make sure it happens, but you have the autonomy in the teams and the autonomy in making sure that people that want to have this hat have it, and they're supporting each other.
Yeah, and totally that, Sarah. And there's a great link with the other question that we talked about, how to get executive buy-in. Because if you focus on only the embedded approach, you in practice have lots of silos, right? So
Yeah.
imagine that you have 100 teams working on DevEx in a separate way.
Yeah.
They will find their challenges and they will spend time and budget to make that happen. So how many hours would each team need? And then after some times, all the problems were solved,
Yeah.
hopefully. But the real question is, we are talking about optimizing something, right? But when is optimizing this something? When is it worth it? Because you really want to have these platform thinking or dedicated teams, DevEx teams, enabling things for multiple teams, because you also need, as a consequence, less budget to make it happen, therefore delivering more value in a quicker way with less effort. So
finding
again,
those synergies.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you mentioned like the optimal is making sure that the people remain embedded within the teams. And I think, yes, there is value. And when I mentioned like having a team, obviously it always starts with, you always have people within each team. The way we've done it, like being a roller hat, being a champion of something, like it starts from there. Mm-hmm. And in any case, when you start at a smaller scale as a business, you probably don't have the numbers to facilitate having like a dedicated team to anything around DevEx. So you want to embed it within them. But I would say that there is a certain point where having the ability to have people whose primary team, whose only team is developer experience, is still valuable and is more valuable than having only people embedded in the teams. Once you have enough that you want to have a team that is around DevEx, it doesn't mean that you stop having the people embedded in the teams. They still exist. They become representative to the developer experience team to make sure that you don't lose touch. That understanding is still there. But I feel like having a dedicated team is going to empower you to have this product mindset that we've talked about. Because if you want to start thinking truly like a product team, having an owner, having an understanding of what you're delivering, this is more involved than just one concern when you're within another team. It's a whole product you're delivering. And the only way to truly enable that, I believe, is by having a team dedicated to it. But obviously that's not where you start with embedding people within the teams. You start by creating, nurturing those, and having a governance. So you do have this centralized from the beginning with people talking, but there comes to a point where you start realizing, like Juan was saying, like you have those connections of trying to optimize, of saying, oh, we can now deliver for like all of those teams at the same time if we do this together. And now you have more and more shared projects. And eventually you get to a point where there's enough value to create this dedicated team that can then start talking about long-term projects, long-term goals in order to deliver this developer experience product. So I think in an ideal scenario, it is hybrid, but there should be a point where you have people fully dedicated to it.
Yeah, and I think that the hybrid solution can have a dedicated team in it. If you have a dedicated team, just like you have, I've seen it before, the architect team, and you don't have people within the teams, embedded in those teams, having those hats, supporting those teams, it really does become the ivory tower. So, yeah. And I don't think it's just as simple as having a product and stakeholders, because I think that you cannot understand the real developer experience unless you're sitting in that experience somehow. It's even, yeah, I think that's why it needs to be something hybrid in the middle of it. But I do 100% agree that it helps to have that craft taken seriously. There needs to be experts on it that are focused on it, that have real skills in it, and that skill set is getting spread and stretched down. If you just have developers that have no experience in that, and there's no, let's say, team dedicated to learning more about that or something, I mean, they'll try all kinds of things, but they won't necessarily improve. But I think that also happens with Scrum Masters. If you just ask someone be a Scrum Master, but you don't treat it like a craft and you don't take it seriously, usually the teams are having this zombie kind of Scrum going on and not really becoming more agile and improved. So I agree with you.
I think the idea of having that connection always is very important. I agree. If you only have a team that doesn't have people like present in other teams as well, like it's easier to build this ivory tower. One of the things can be to have people wearing hats in the other teams, acting as representative, as connection. One thing that I've also seen work in addition to that, not in replacement, is short rotations. Having people from the DevEx team go work for a month or two within one of the product team, and the other way around. Let's say a product team has some specific tooling that is going to be implemented for them specifically, or for a bunch of teams, but that includes them as beneficiaries, then they may want to work for a month on the DevEx team, delivering this specific feature for them.
An amazing idea.
And then now they take ownership as well, and they bring that knowledge back to their teams, and that shares that information, that shares that culture of developer experience.
I love that idea.
So finding ways to support those, I call it short-term movements, because it's not like you completely changing teams, but like this kind of short-term transition of just going for a short stint in another team and learn from them.
It reminds me of that show. I don't know what the name of it is, but where the boss goes and works with the employees and they don't know that it's the CEO or owner of the company. And that person would be a mechanic or be a chef or something for a week, and the amount of learnings that they would get from that week of being in that team was like 10 times that than you would get from surveys or talking at the surface. So I really love that idea, Benjamin. So a dedicated team, but making sure that those people in that team are taking turns being in actual teams. How that would look without disrupting the team forming, like having to go back and because whenever you change a team, the productivity goes down. You have to recreate the manifest, etc. So that would have to be thought about how to do that. But I do like the idea.
Yeah, a great link between the closing part of the last question and the very first question, because we talked about
it's about a loop, right? So I'm curious, Benjamin, how did this conversation go for you today?
It was really interesting. I really enjoyed discussing this topic. It's a topic close to my heart, so I always enjoy talking about it. But it was nice to hear all the different perspectives and to see other people care about this and wanting to push it forward. So I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for being here, Benjamin. Your insights have given so much to the topic, right, João?
Yes, indeed. It's such a great topic. I like that we are highlighting its importance, because it's there, it's everywhere, but we don't often talk about it, really. And I feel that I could keep talking about it with you guys for really hours.
Exactly.
I mean, it's such an important thing.
Yeah, I have to say, João, this is one of our favorite episodes. So I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the variation of the questions, but I also really enjoyed having a guest here, having that additional view on things and how we built up from each other, but also got some new ideas from each other. And I really love that.
Exactly. Yeah. Thanks for joining, Ben. It was a pleasure.
Do we have all a coffee cup that we want to raise?
I do not have a coffee cup.
Bummer.
I had it before.
We lost it. But I hope that you all have a terrific afternoon. I'm going to push the stop button and we can just have a checkout with each other. Where is the stop?